Tolerance, relativism, cross-cultural comparisons. A view of values as biological phenomena must not be allowed to add to the confusions surrounding, quote, moral relativism and multiculturalism. First of all, the incommensurability, irreconcilability, basically, of group norms does not oblige anyone to do in Rome as the Romans do, or, when in Rome, to keep to the mores of his own culture, or, in Rome or at home, to tolerate the ways of others. Adopting local customs is one norm, defying them another, refusing to judge a third. Naturalism accords them no special status. Naturalism does not tell American blacks to conform to white majority standards, nor that they should defy them, nor that they are entitled to defy them. It does not tell whites to maintain white values, or, come the demographic day when they are a minority, to adopt non-white ones. Nor does it counsel either race to tolerate the other, or to seek dominance. Having repudiated objective morality, the naturalist has no advice to give about what anyone ought to do. A view of group norms as products of evolution must also be distinguished from, quote, moral relativism, the doctrine, as it is usually expressed, that each group's values are right for them, and that each group should be judged by its own standards. This popular view is not only not entailed by naturalism, it is, despite its surface plausibility and seeming broad-mindedness, unintelligible. Moral relativists piss me off. You encounter it a lot with Bible believers. They think that because God told the Israelites to murder babies, that makes it okay. Or because it was a long time ago, that it's okay. No. Murder of the innocents has always been wrong, and it always will be wrong. But people are afraid to admit to themselves that the God of the Bible, the God that they've been adoring and worshiping all these years, is an asshole, an objectively, demonstrably immoral scumbag, loser. But that's what he is, and that's all there is to it. When moral relativists declare that the moral quality of an act depends on the society in which it is done, they are trying to say that moral terms are meaningless in isolation and make sense only in such contexts as right for or wrong for social group X. The very same act can be wrong for group A and permitted, even obligatory, for group B, and is such when forbidden by A's group, but permitted or commanded by B's. As Christians but not Muslims accept eating pork, Christians but not Muslims may eat pork. Straightforward as this idea seems, however, it is on par with saying that Mount Everest is 29,000 feet tall for Christians, but not for Muslims. Just as Mount Everest either is 29,000 feet tall or it isn't, period, so too, once actions are granted moral qualities of any sort, eating pork is either permissible or impermissible, period. There is a connection of sorts between naturalism and tolerance. While in point of logic, the one does not imply the other, in point of psychological effect, a naturalistic outlook does tend to make people less judgmental. For one thing, it strongly suggests that some groups may be unable to conform fully to the values of another. Since no one is obligated to do what he cannot do, deviant groups are relieved of blame for falling short of societal standards that they cannot live up to, and normative groups are relieved of the disagreeable chore of passing negative judgments. It is as pointless to insist that individuals with innately high time preferences and low empathy should follow white rules of cooperation as to insist that Japan fields world-class basketball teams. Second, realizing that there is no right answer to a dispute often leads the disputants to disengage. Nobody would criticize Martians if they could only sense gamma rays for their indifference to Van Gogh, nor would Martians criticize humans for indifference to their shortwave masterpieces. Shakespeare enjoys the highest prestige among Caucasoids, but biologically based differences in aesthetic response might lead others to find his work less compelling, and his language simply baffles people whose IQ falls below some minimum. white musical tastes favor harmony, complexity, and rhythmic regularity, while blacks favor improvisation and syncopation. People debate the merits of jazz and classical music with increasing bitterness as the subject has acquired ideological baggage, but naturalists see the issue as irresolvable. How could an observer whose neural wiring disposed him to enjoy neither decide between saving the last score of a Bach concerto and the last recorded Louis Armstrong solo? Once one agrees that there is no way, the jazz versus classical debate mercifully loses its point and heat. Yet interracial conflicts are unlikely to abate so easily. Living and letting live is easy when it comes to art, but what of crime, public deportment, claims of redress? Does sociobiology offer anything beyond power struggles? If the races were not intermixed, we wouldn't have to worry about interracial conflicts, now would we? But someone, a long time ago, decided that it would be a good idea to mix some people with other people. And they knew that it would cause division in perpetuity for the foreseeable future, for the next several hundred years. Bringing Africans to America hundreds of years ago was basically an early form of biological warfare, and it wasn't the first time such a thing had been done. What naturalism does need is some pragmatic point of view for adjudicating racial conflicts. One is offered in the next chapter. Before turning to that, however, some words are in order about multiculturalism. Multiculturalism and Afrocentrism. If critics of the increasingly pervasive trend toward multiculturalism and Afrocentrism associate it with relativism, its friends associate it with tolerance. Who is right? Standard Afrocentric works are too meretricious. Meretricious means apparently attractive, but having in reality no value or integrity. Standard Afrocentric works are too meretricious to shed much light on this question or repay extended discussion for any other reason. For instance, part of James's case that the Greeks stole philosophy from Africa is that Alexander's conquest of Egypt gave Aristotle access to the Library of Alexandria. Alexander, of course, founded Alexandria, there having been no library there previously. Incompetence of this order leaves the commentator little choice but to reconstruct the debate in his own terms. We was librarians and sheeeit. Taken most charitably, and as usually presented, multiculturalism holds that all cultures deserve understanding and respect. Afrocentrism adds that the cultures and achievements of Africa and Black America are unduly neglected in the contemporary United States, and hence deserve a larger role than the marginal one they now receive in the education of Black and white children. Hearing more about Blacks will raise Black self-esteem, damaged by racism, while white children, raised to think their culture best, will be made more modest. Black children do not need to learn any more about white culture, as they are already inundated by it. So understood, multiculturalism is neither nihilistic nor relativistic. Far from forbidding cross-cultural comparisons, it insists that Black culture is at least as good as white, and that it is a good thing, period, to play down European culture. Multiculturalists think everybody should know more about Black achievements. Some critics reply to this official or exoteric version of multiculturalism that the European classics deserve pride of place because of their intrinsic excellence and universality. However, the notion of, quote, intrinsic excellence is ill-defined from a biosocial perspective, nor is it clear that European culture is esteemed equally highly by Blacks and whites. Edward Hirsch's more empirical argument that the United States is a European country which, for better or worse, must maintain contact with its European origins to comprehend itself, invites the reply that such conservatism is for the worse, an excuse to perpetuate oppression. Bloom, Henry, and Hirsch miss the underlying issue because they treat multiculturalism and Afrocentrism as normative claims about the value of black culture and its proper place in education. In fact, multiculturalism and Afrocentrism are claims of historical fact about the attainments of Africans and American blacks. To be sure, these claims are made part of a case against the majority society. Grant that black achievement is central to history, that science and mathematics are black creations stolen by the Greeks, and that this great truth is scarcely known because whites have suppressed it. It follows at once that whites are villainous. The claims themselves, however, are empirical in nature, not about educational policy in any controversial sense. Everyone would instantly accede to the demands of multiculturalists were the facts as they say. So, empirical, right or wrong, provable, false or true. It's not an opinion. So let's see if these claims are true. I think we all know, but some people don't, shockingly. Assessment of Afrocentrism by the usual tests of historical accuracy is impeded by the bellicosity of Afrocentrists, which keeps pushing the issue back to the realm of partisanship. Thus, after claiming in The Destruction of Black Civilization, 1974, that Africans invented, among other things, democracy, Chancellor Williams concludes, quote, "The white man is their bitter enemy, for this is not the ranting of wild-eyed militancy, but the calm and unmistakable verdict of several thousand years of documented history. There must be a mental revolution out of which black America faces up to the stark reality that white America, as a whole, is its enemy." End quote. This rage runs on until the reader forgets that it is fueled by the factual claim that Africans invented democracy. It is especially frustrating to pursue the issue through the minefield of charges of racism, detonated by almost everything anyone says, but the resulting contradictions are inseparable from multiculturalism itself. We have already seen how Hacker classifies belief in mental differences between the races as bigotry, yet considers it inherently racial malice to ask black children to adapt to a white school setting in view of their distinctive learning style. So is their learning style genetic? If so, then you are also a bigot, you're admitting to racial differences, or is it something that they can change? And if it's something that they can change, then why shouldn't they change it? Hacker goes on, quote, "Black children should be given more opportunities for expressive talking, since black culture gives as much attention to style as to the substance of speech. Here, too, it has been found, no reference is given, that black youngsters apply themselves more readily to lessons involving actual people than to more abstract situations. Similarly, teachers should be tolerant of more casual approaches to syntax, time, and measurement." Okay, a casual approach to syntax. So basically, they shouldn't have to actually speak English correctly. Casual approaches to time. Punctuality doesn't matter. And casual approaches to measurement. I don't even know what that means. How can you casually approach measurement? Something is a foot long or it's not. I don't know. Continuing with the quote. "White children tend to tell stories in a linear fashion, while black children are more apt to employ a spiral style." I wish they would provide an example of what a linear versus a spiral storytelling sounds like. Continuing with the quote. "Black children are also more attuned to their bodies and physical needs. So, some educators argue they should be allowed more leeway for moving around the classroom." End quote. Hacker suggests that blacks would be happier being educated away from whites, although he would surely denounce the idea that white children would be happier away from blacks, who cannot speak grammatically, sit still, or keep to the point. It's only racist when we do it. It's only racist when we want to be separate from them. If they want to be separate from us, that's completely understandable because we're evil and oppressive, but they never do anything wrong. So why would we ever want to be away from them? They diversify and enrich our culture so much, so incomprehensibly. and there's no drawbacks, there's no downside. So why would we ever want to be separated? The standard resolution of this inconsistency is to say that black children differ from whites because of discrimination, and for that reason need exposure to their own cultural heritage, which is anyway more attractive than a, quote, world dominated by technology, administration, and corporate priorities. Yeah, you wouldn't want any technology in your life making things easier, invented by white people. Furthermore, to convince black children that they are the intellectual equals of whites and Asians, they should be taught that their ancestors produced cultures comparable to those of Europe and Asia. This is how Hacker comes to urge teachers to tell black children that Africans invented vaccination and carbon steel blast furnaces, and beat Columbus to the New World, although he carefully avoids saying these claims are true. By this pedagogical route, does genetic egalitarianism inevitably lead to Afrocentrism? This guy is basically telling educators that they should lie to black kids because it will boost their self-esteem. Only resolute focus on the empirical question, the actual historical contribution of blacks, can keep discussion from decaying into irrelevance and emotionalism. Hacker also recommends that black students adopt African names, and he falls into the language of mental genocide. The issue is not white villainy or the needs of black children, but whether blacks have been as important to American and world civilization as Afrocentrists say. When it is asserted in African and African American Contributions to Science and Technology, a baseline essay around which Portland, Oregon elementary schools designed their science curriculum, that Africans have been, quote, the wellspring of creativity and knowledge on which the foundation of all science, technology, and engineering rests, end quote, the single pertinent question is whether this is in fact so. Good old Portland, Oregon. Some might object to this question on the grounds that historical importance is itself a normative and selective notion, hence deformable by white bias. Man, the truth is like a white thing, know what I'm saying? 2 + 2 is only 4 because the cracker told me so. There is little to be said in support of this familiar claim. Importance has an objective measure. Impact, the difference an event, individual, or group has made. Columbus was more important than Cortez because the gap between our world and the world that would have existed had Columbus never been born is wider than the gap between our world and the world that would have existed had Cortez never been born. Classical Greece was more important than 15th century Australia because the present would have been about the same without Australian Aborigines, but unrecognizable without the Greeks. Every group's history matters to the group itself, but not every group has mattered equally, made an equal difference to mankind as a whole. As everyone knows, but has become reluctant to say, the world as a whole would hardly have noticed had sub-Saharan Africa not existed or never been contacted by Europeans and Asians. No important discovery, invention, or world leader emerged from Africa. I asked, I think Grok AI, how many modern inventions came from sub-Saharan Africa, and it said less than 1% come from Africa as a whole, and most of those were from North Africa, where, you know, the majority of the population is not black. So a fraction of 1%, a very small fraction of 1% of modern inventions came from sub-Saharan Africa. I think the world would be doing just fine without whatever those inventions happen to be, and they probably would have gotten invented anyway. No important discovery, invention, or world leader emerged from Africa. The art, music, architecture, literature, and political history of Eurasia owe virtually nothing to Africans. Trade with Black Africa, as opposed to European exploitation of the mineral wealth of the African continent, has always been negligible. Afrocentrists point to, or exaggerate, the contributions of Egypt, but in any event, Egyptians were not black. Blacks in the United States formed a small rural population until well into the 20th century, played no role in the construction of the major American cities, and had little contact with the 19th century immigrants who influenced the country's character. The Civil War, although it revolved around blacks, not really, that's just the ostensible excuse. It was really about consolidating power in Washington. But anyway, the Civil War was conducted by whites. Democracy and liberty, the basic ideals of American public life, are European. The relatively small cadre of black entrepreneurs, scientists, and doctors has not appreciably influenced American business or medicine. Some inventions by blacks, such as the traffic light and railroad coupling, while significant, cannot compare in impact with the airplane or the telephone, although they now are often given more prominence in history texts. Other widely cited attributions, such as Benjamin Banneker's design of the District of Columbia, seem to be fiction. While the Patent Office keeps no racial statistics, it seems likely that blacks hold disproportionately few patents. Of the formative works of American literature, only Huckleberry Finn is concerned significantly with race. The topic is scarcely mentioned by Hawthorne, Melville, Poe, Whitman, Dreiser, James, Wharton, Sinclair, Hemingway, Salinger, Heller, or Roth, or Emerson, or Thoreau. Few blacks have achieved eminence in areas other than sports, entertainment, the demand for rights, or writing about race itself. Afrocentrists accuse conventional white authorities of inventing these facts, but white historians, who freely acknowledge the attainments of Asians, have no reason to lie about blacks. The truth is that, until recently, most whites gave blacks relatively little thought, and would not have cared enough about blacks one way or the other to invest energy in obscuring their achievements. Blacks simply have not mattered as much to the white world as Afrocentrists implicitly claim they did, and perhaps wish they did, for having powerful enemies is considerably more flattering than being ignored. The limited interest in blacks shown by conventional historians is best explained by the belief that further interest was unwarranted. Africanists cite scattered references to blacks in Herodotus to support a Nubian origin for Greek religion, but ignore Aristotle's silence about Africa. Why should Aristotle have lied, but not Herodotus? Running through the entire stolen heritage thesis is the idea that knowledge is a tangible good that, akin to a stolen car, can be lost to its original possessor. Knowledge is not like that. After Marco Polo stole the preparation of noodles from the court of Kublai Khan, the Chinese remained able to make noodles. The secret spread. Afrocentrists speak of a raid into Africa in Aristotle's time to steal African science, but ignorance of the Pythagorean theorem on the part of modern Africans cannot be explained by the Greeks having made off with it. The currency among blacks of the stolen heritage doctrine, with its curious conception of knowledge, is perhaps more evidence of race differences in cognitive functioning. The fact that they think that you can steal knowledge proves that they never had any knowledge. If you think that you're stupid because someone stole your knowledge, that just proves that you're too stupid to arrive at conclusions by yourself. Man, that motherfucker stole my IQ and shit. At the risk of lapsing into the moralism I have sought to avoid, I would make some suggestions about multicultural education. The principal point is that, whatever the United States may eventually become, its schools at present are white institutions, created and financed by whites, based on white pedagogical ideals, which include white criteria for adequate performance. It seems reasonable to expect anyone demanding access to these or any other institutions to conform to their standards. Blacks who think it important for their children to learn about black culture can teach it to their children after school hours. No reason comes to mind for forcing white children to learn this material in public schools. Blacks to whom the curriculum in white schools is intolerable, who wish to spend as much time studying Africa as Europe, and pursue literature courses which balance white writers with black ones, are and should be free to create their own schools. That is the meaning of tolerance and diversity. After all, black universities exist without anyone insisting that they make whites comfortable. Do you see white people going to Nigeria and saying, "Hey man, you're not teaching enough about European history. You need to conform to the minority"? No, we would never do that. Blacks without the resources to create the schools they wish must accept attending the schools others have created, abiding by the standards these others consider appropriate. Beggars can't be choosers. An obvious parallel is religious instruction. Catholics would like their children to learn about Catholicism, but they do not insist that the public schools teach it. They either send their children to Catholic schools, or, if their children attend public schools, send them for religious instruction after. They do not insist that all children, Catholic and non-Catholic, learn religious dogmas. Insistence that someone else, white people, do a job that black cultural institutions should be doing breeds resentment and confirms the idea that blacks on their own cannot sustain an educational system. No one has forced blacks to attend white schools. Blacks demanded admission to them. Surely it is unseemly to demand access to an institution in the name of equal opportunity, opportunity, that is, to compete by the rules the institution has established, and then insist that its rules be changed. What would we think of a short man who asks for only a fair chance to play basketball, to be judged by his ability rather than his height, and then, once on the court, insists that the basket be lowered or the ball changed? In being allowed to play by the going rules, he got a chance that was fair by his own stipulation. In asking for more, he complains of rules he has implicitly agreed to accept. That is what blacks do when, after entering schools known to be of European design, they complain of a Eurocentric curriculum they have difficulty mastering. Could not have put it better myself. I love analogies. The basketball one. That was a good one. Well, that's the end of the chapter, and I just have one footnote here. The last one, 45. Surviving Egyptian religious writings lack the dialectical character of Greek philosophy. Although the Egyptians knew special cases of the Pythagorean theorem and the volume of certain solids, their mathematics lacked the characteristic Greek rigor and generality. Lefkowitz, 1996, is a scholarly debunking of claims that Greece stole important elements of their culture from Africa. Okay, see you in chapter 7.